The wind wove through the steel and glass monoliths, its hollow howl mocking John Mitchell's solitude. Standing atop one such skyscraper, he gazed upon the sprawling city below, a labyrinth without an exit, mirroring the maze of his own thoughts. Streaks of burnt umber and ash smeared across the sky, the sun sinking like a stone into the depths of the cityscape. He set down his worn leather bag, his hands unsteady as he unzipped it to reveal his camera, once an extension of his soul, now a relic that weighed heavy in his grasp. His fingers quivered, not from the cold, but the residual tremors that had plagued him since he quit drinking. A tightness gripped his chest, each breath shallow and strained, as if the air itself resisted him. Time was slipping away. The scent of rain on hot pavement rose from the streets below, and the distant cacophony of honking cars echoed up the concrete walls. He tried to attach the lens, but his hands shook uncontrollably. Beads of sweat formed on his brow despite the cool evening air. Why now, he thought. Why couldn't he control the simplest of tasks anymore? The lens slipped, nearly tumbling over the edge before he caught it. Damn it, he muttered under his breath, his voice swallowed by the city's distant hum. He fumbled, finally securing the lens, and raised the camera to his eye. Through the viewfinder, the world appeared fragmented, elusive. He adjusted the focus, but everything remained blurred. A sudden gust of wind rattled him, its sharp whistle cutting through the silence. His chest constricted, the air feeling thin. When he looked again, the moment was gone. The sun had vanished behind the skyscrapers, leaving a dull, muted glow. He lowered the camera, a hollow ache settling in his chest. He had missed the perfect shot, a casualty of his unsteady hands. It felt like losing a piece of himself all over again. The city lights flickered to life, oblivious to his despair. As the shadows deepened, he wondered if he'd ever find his way out of the darkness enveloping him. Later that evening, the stark contrast of the gallery's bright lights replaced the somber hues of the rooftop. The buzz of forced conversations and clinking glasses filled the air, but the emptiness inside John remained. The gallery buzzed with the low hum of polite conversations and clinking glasses. John's photographs adorned the stark white walls, images meant to capture the raw essence of humanity, but now seemed lifeless, much like he felt. He navigated through the small crowd, each step heavy, his presence barely acknowledged. Sarah approached him, a cautious smile on her face. Her auburn hair was elegantly pinned back, and her eyes searched his for a glimmer of enthusiasm. "You made it," she said softly. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, his eyes fixed elsewhere. He took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and downed it in one gulp. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Maybe take it easy tonight?" He subtly shrugged her off. "It's a celebration, isn't it?" They stood in uncomfortable silence. Sarah glanced around the room, her expression a mix of hope and disappointment. "People are talking about your work." "Let them talk," he muttered. Across the room, Alex Carter, his longtime friend and art dealer, engaged with patrons, effortlessly charming them. He caught Sarah's eye and offered a warm smile. She returned it, a brief moment that went unnoticed by John, but not by those attuned to such subtleties. A couple approached John. "We were just discussing your piece over there," the woman began hesitantly. "It's interesting." "Glad it could spark a conversation," he replied flatly. They exchanged awkward glances before moving on. Sarah exhaled slowly. "You're not even trying." "Trying for what?" he snapped, his voice low but edged with bitterness. "This whole thing is a farce." "John, please," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "Can we talk about this later?" He looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in weeks. She seemed tired, the sparkle in her eyes dimmed. Guilt gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. "Sure, later." Without waiting for a response, he made his way to the exit, the weight of the room pressing down on him. The city's vibrant nightlife blurred past him as he walked aimlessly, eventually finding refuge in a dimly lit bar, a stark contrast to the gallery's artificial brightness. The bar was a sanctuary for lost souls, bathed in shadows and the faint glow of neon signs. John settled onto a stool, ordering a whiskey neat. The first sip burned, but it was a familiar pain, one that dulled the sharper edges of his reality. He stared at the array of bottles lining the shelf, their amber contents glowing under the muted lights. Reflections of a life he no longer recognized stared back at him. "Rough night?" A voice beside him asked. He turned to see a man about his age, casually dressed, eyes sincere. You could say that. The man extended a hand. Name's Adam. John. He shook it briefly. Mind if I join you? John gestured to the empty stool. Free country. They sat in silence for a moment before Adam spoke again. You look familiar. Have we met before? Doubt it. Wait, you're John Mitchell, the photographer, aren't you? John raised an eyebrow. You've heard of me? Of course. Your early work, Echoes of Solitude, that was something else. It spoke to me. A flicker of pride warmed him. Glad someone appreciated it. What have you been working on lately? He hesitated, swirling his drink. Nothing noteworthy. Well, I'd love to see it when it's out. John forced a smile. Yeah, maybe. They chatted intermittently, Adam sharing stories about his own life, an aspiring musician turned teacher. His genuine admiration and easy demeanor were a balm to John's weary spirit. But as the night wore on, the fleeting hope kindled by the conversation began to fade. The familiar urge to escape pulled at him. He ordered another drink, then another. Adam glanced at his watch. It's getting late. I should head out. It was great meeting you, John. You too, he replied, not meeting his eyes. As Adam left, John felt the isolation creep back in. Surrounded by people yet utterly alone. He signaled the bartender for another round, surrendering to the oblivion he craved. Hours later, the quiet streets guided him back home. The alcohol coursing through his veins did little to numb the dread pooling in his stomach as he approached the door of his apartment. The apartment was dark when John stumbled in, the silence interrupted only by the sound of his unsteady footsteps. He fumbled for the light switch, illuminating the living room where Sarah sat waiting, her expression unreadable. You're late, she said evenly. He shrugged off his jacket, tossing it onto a chair. Didn't realize I had a curfew? She stood up, arms crossed. We were supposed to talk, remember? About what? He mumbled, his gaze avoiding hers. About us. About what's happening to you. Nothing's happening to me. He moved toward the kitchen, but she blocked his path. Stop running away, John. I'm here, trying to help you. But you have to let me in. He laughed bitterly. Help me? Like you did at the gallery tonight? That was a disaster. It wasn't the gallery, John. It's you. You're pushing everyone away. Maybe they need to be pushed, he snapped. Her eyes flashed with frustration. Do you even hear yourself? You're destroying everything. Your career, our marriage. He met her gaze, anger simmering beneath the surface. Don't pin this all on me. You're not exactly blameless. She recoiled as if struck. What is that supposed to mean? You tell me, he retorted, stepping closer. All those late nights at work, the secretive phone calls. Think I haven't noticed? Tears welled in her eyes. You're drunk. This isn't getting us anywhere. Fine by me. He brushed past her, heading toward the bedroom. Don't you walk away from me, she called after him. He spun around. What do you want from me, Sarah? I'm doing the best I can. Your best? This? She gestured around the cluttered apartment. This is your best? Maybe it is, he said coldly. A tense silence filled the room. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I can't keep living like this. He watched as she retrieved a small suitcase from behind the couch. What are you doing? I'm leaving, she said quietly. I need some space. Maybe it'll give you time to figure things out. Where are you going? He demanded. To stay with a friend. Who? Alex? The name slipped out before he could stop it. Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and guilt flashing across her face. This isn't about Alex. Isn't it? He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Figures. She moved toward the door, pausing to look back at him. I hope you find what you're looking for, John. The door closed softly behind her, the finality of the sound echoing in the stillness. He stood motionless, her absence pressing heavily upon him. The apartment felt vast and hollow, amplifying his solitude. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. A part of him wanted to chase after her, to apologize, to promise change. But another part, the part that had grown accustomed to numbness, kept him rooted in place. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flask. Unscrewing the cap, he took a long swig, the liquor burning a path down his throat. The familiar sensation enveloped him, blurring the edges of his reality. His gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the shelf, a candid shot of him and Sarah from happier times, laughing under a sun-drenched sky. He felt a pang of longing, a distant echo of emotions he could barely recall. "How did we get here?" he whispered into the void. The city outside continued its relentless pulse, indifferent to his turmoil. In that moment, John felt like a ghost drifting through his own life, unseen and unheard. He stood up unsteadily, crossing to the window. The skyline stretched before him, a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, Sarah was seeking solace he hadn't been able to provide. Hours slipped by as he lingered at the window, caught between echoes of yesterday and the void of what lay ahead. The bottle in his hand offered temporary relief, but the emptiness it left behind was vast. When dawn began to break, casting a pale light over the city, John finally turned away from the window. Exhaustion seeped into his bones. He lay down on the couch, not bothering with a blanket, and closed his eyes. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fragmented dreams and unspoken regrets. The path ahead was shrouded, but deep down, a part of him knew that something had to change. Yet, for now, he surrendered to the darkness, allowing it to swallow him whole. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels formed a mechanical lullaby, contrasting sharply with the storm raging inside John's mind. The faint aroma of brewed coffee wafted through the carriage, mingling with the scent of worn leather seats. The distant murmur of fellow passengers created a cocoon of anonymity around him. Seated by the window, he watched as the towering cityscape gradually gave way to rolling hills and open fields bathed in the golden glow of morning light. Sunlight flickered through the trees, casting fleeting shadows across his face. His fingers hovered over a worn envelope stuffed with old photographs, emotions swirling. Fear of what he'd lost, guilt over bridges burned, and a faint hope that the images might hold a key to his redemption. Taking a deep breath, he slid out the first photo. It showed him at 18, beaming with unbridled enthusiasm, his trusty camera hanging casually around his neck, a symbol of dreams not yet tarnished. Beside him stood his best friend from high school, both radiating the invincibility of youth, blissfully unaware of the complexities adulthood would bring. The train whistle pierced the air, pulling John from his reverie. Outside, a herd of deer darted across an open field, their swift movement a stark contrast to his own stagnation. He shuffled through more images, his parents standing proudly in front of their modest home, his mother waving from the garden she tended so lovingly, his father stern, but with a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Each photograph was a portal, a frozen fragment of time whispering tales of joy, regret, and everything in between. He paused on a snapshot of him and Sarah on their wedding day, eyes locked in a gaze full of promise. The memory wasn't just a moment captured, it was a stark reminder of promises made and broken. The scent of lavender from the photo paper mingled with the musty smell of the old envelope. Nostalgia tightened his chest as he contemplated the images. These frozen moments captured who he used to be, who he might still be, if not for the choices that led him astray. The train sped onward, each mile bringing him closer to a place he hadn't visited in years, a place he once called home. Gazing out the window as the landscape blurred by, he contemplated the impulsiveness of his decision to leave the city. The argument with Sarah replayed in his mind, each word a sharp edge cutting into his conscience. Maybe distance would provide clarity. Maybe the familiar sights and sounds of his hometown could rekindle something within him that he feared was lost forever. The faint aroma of fresh pastries drifted in from the dining car, momentarily distracting him. He watched as a child a few seats ahead laughed gleefully, his joy pure and uncomplicated. John envied that innocence. As the conductor announced the next stop, John carefully tucked the photographs back into the envelope. His fingers brushed against the flask, hidden in his jacket, a constant reminder of the battle he faced. Resisting its pull, he focused on the steady motion of the train to soothe him, if only slightly. The rhythmic sway lulled him into a meditative state, thoughts ebbing and flowing like the passing scenery. A sudden jolt signaled their arrival. The small station came into view, its quaint platform a stark contrast to the bustling city terminals he was used to. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. Stepping off the train, John was immediately enveloped by the crisp scent of the sea, carried on a gentle breeze. The small station looked much the same, save for a fresh coat of paint and a new digital timetable display. He slung his bag over his shoulder and started down the main street. The town unfolded like pages from a worn journal, each corner scribbled with anecdotes of his former self. The old bakery, now a modern cafe, felt like a stranger wearing a friend's face. The comforting aroma of warm cinnamon rolls had been replaced by the sterile scent of espresso machines. The windows were filled with people sipping lattes and typing on laptops, their faces aglow with the pale light of screens. As he walked, he noticed subtle changes. The park's playground updated with modern equipment, new shops where vacant lots used to be. Yet some things remained the same. The echo of children's laughter, the familiar chime of the clock tower, the way the sunlight danced on the surface of the fountain in the town square. The scent of salt water mixed with freshly cut grass filled the air, while the distant cry of seagulls echoed memories of carefree summers. Each step stirred conflicting emotions. Comfort mingled with a sense of alienation. "John Mitchell, is that you?" a voice called out. He turned to see Jennifer Thompson, an old classmate, beaming at him. Her blonde hair was cut short, and she wore a vibrant scarf that fluttered in the breeze. "Jennifer, wow," he replied, a genuine smile forming despite himself. "It's been ages." "It certainly has. What brings you back to our little corner of the world?" He hesitated. "Just visiting," he said vaguely. "Needed a change of scenery?" She nodded knowingly. "Sometimes a trip down memory lane is just what the soul needs." He glanced around. "The place looks different." "Progress," she said with a shrug, "whether we like it or not." "You seem to have embraced it," he observed, noting her modern attire. She laughed softly. "I suppose I have." A moment of comfortable silence passed between them. "You know, some of us were worried about you," she said, her eyes searching his. He managed a thin smile. "No need to worry. I'm still standing." "Are you?" she asked gently, her gaze unwavering. He looked away, the weight of her concern pressing on him. "I'm managing." She touched his arm lightly. "Well, if you ever want to talk, I'm here." "Thanks, Jennifer. That means a lot." "Are you free for a coffee? I'd love to catch up." He glanced at the cafe, its modern facade a stark contrast to the warm memories he had of the old bakery. "Sure, why not?" They settled at an outdoor table, the aroma of freshly baked pastries enveloping them. As they chatted, John learned that Jennifer had become a teacher at their old high school, married with 2 children. "You look happy," he observed, noting the sparkle in her eyes. "I am," she admitted. "Life has its ups and downs, but I'm content." He envied her serenity. "That's great. What about you? I heard you became a famous photographer." He shrugged. "Something like that." She studied him for a moment. "You don't sound too thrilled." He hesitated, the facade slipping. "It's complicated." "Isn't it always?" she said gently. "Seriously, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here." He was touched by her sincerity. "Thanks, Jennifer. Maybe I'll take you up on that." As they parted ways, John couldn't shake the contrast between their lives. Jennifer had found fulfillment in the simplicity of family and community, while he had chased ambitions that now seemed hollow. The realization settled uneasily within him. The renovated bakery felt like a metaphor for his own transformation, changed on the surface but missing the warmth and authenticity of its original self. The Reynolds house stood at the end of a quiet street, its white picket fence and neatly trimmed hedges a testament to his mother's diligent care. The scent of blooming roses from her garden filled the air. John paused at the gate, nerves fluttering in his stomach. It had been too long since he'd crossed this threshold. He walked up the path and knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal his mother, her face lighting up with a mix of surprise and joy. "John, what a wonderful surprise!" she exclaimed, pulling him into a warm embrace. The familiar scent of lavender soap enveloped him. "Hi, Mom," he murmured, a rush of comfort washing over him. Come in. Your father's out back." He stepped inside, the interior just as he remembered. Family photos lining the walls, the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hall. Memories surfaced unpredictably, like fragments of a song heard long ago, each note stirring emotions he thought he'd forgotten. His mother led him to the kitchen, bustling about to make tea. "Sit down, dear. Tell me everything." Before he could respond, his father entered, wiping his hands on a rag. Michael Reynolds was a tall man, his once dark hair now silver, but his posture still straight and strong. His eyes held a mixture of relief and restraint, as if unsure whether to welcome his son or brace for disappointment. "Look who decided to visit," his mother said cheerfully. His father regarded him with a nod. "John." "Dad." A tense quiet filled the room before his mother intervened. "I'll get the tea. You two catch up." They moved to the living room, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy. John cleared his throat. "How have you been?" "Can't complain," his father replied. "The roof needed fixing, but I took care of it." "Good to hear." Another pause. His father glanced at the worn edges of John's jacket, a silent critique. "So, what brings you back?" "Just thought it was time for a visit." His father eyed him critically. "Is that so?" John bristled. "Can't a son visit his parents without an ulterior motive?" "Depends on the son," his father retorted. "Michael," his mother admonished gently as she entered with a tray of tea and biscuits. She placed a reassuring hand on John's arm. "You must be hungry. Let me fix your favorite." They sipped their tea in strained silence until his father spoke again. "Still pursuing photography?" John felt a flash of irritation. "Yes, Dad. It's my career. Careers pay the bills. I've managed so far." "Have you?" His father's gaze was steady, piercing. "Yes," John replied, his jaw tightening. "Always figured it was a risky path." "Not everything is about practicality," John snapped. "Some things are worth the risk." His father set his cup down firmly. "And where have those risks gotten you?" "Michael, please," his mother interjected, her eyes pleading. John stood up abruptly. "I didn't come here to be lectured." "Then why did you come?" his father challenged. "Because—" He struggled for words. The tension was palpable, a familiar pattern of unspoken grievances resurfacing. "Because I needed to come home." His father's expression softened ever so slightly. "Home's always been here. It's you who's been absent." Emotion tightened John's throat. "Maybe I didn't feel welcome." His mother stepped between them. "Enough, both of you. This isn't helping." She placed a hand on his cheek. "We've missed you. I can see you're carrying a heavy burden." He looked away, shame creeping up his neck. "I don't know what to do anymore." "Let us help you," she said softly. His father sighed, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Your mother's right. Whatever's happened, we're still family." John met his father's eyes, seeing a flicker of the concern hidden beneath his stern exterior. "I appreciate that." They sat back down, the atmosphere a shade lighter. His mother began reminiscing about fond memories, apple picking in the orchard, family picnics by the lake, and gradually, the conversation flowed more naturally. The rift, while not entirely healed, showed signs of mending. As evening fell, his mother insisted he stay the night. She placed a hand on his arm. "You must be exhausted. Stay here. Let me fix up your old room." He agreed, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he'd missed so dearly. The scent of apple pie wafted from the kitchen, stirring a memory of simpler times. Helping his mother peel apples, laughter filling the room long before life's complexities took hold. The next morning, John rose early, the call of the ocean drawing him. He made his way to the cliffs overlooking the vast expanse of water, a place he often visited in his youth when he needed to think. The sky was a canvas of soft blues and pinks as the sun began its ascent. Waves crashed against the rocks below, the sound both powerful and soothing. The sharp scent of salt and seaweed filled his lungs, the cool breeze carrying a taste of freedom. The cries of seagulls echoed like a chorus of encouragement. He stood near the edge, the wind tugging at his clothes, and breathed in the salty air. The cliffs stood as steadfast sentinels against the relentless assault of the waves, much like the barriers he'd built around himself. He pulled out his camera, the familiar weight comforting in his hands. Raising it to his eye, he framed the horizon where the sea met the sky. As he clicked the shutter, a seagull soared into view, a symbol of freedom. Lowering the camera, he gazed out over the water. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the wind. He turned the flask over in his hands, its polished surface reflecting the turmoil in his eyes. This small vessel had been both a refuge and a prison. His fingers traced the engravings on its surface, a gift from Sarah, back when things were simpler. A torrent of emotions crashed over him. Regret, guilt, a flicker of hope. The enormity of the ocean mirrored the vastness of his internal struggle. He thought about the path that led him here, the successes overshadowed by failures, the love he had taken for granted, the addiction that had become his constant companion. Images of Sarah flooded his mind. Her laughter, the way she wrinkled her nose when deep in thought, the pain in her eyes during their last conversation. He realized how much he had hurt her, how much he had hurt himself. With a surge of resolve, he drew his arm back, the weight of his decision propelling the flask into the abyss. It tumbled downward, glinting in the morning light before disappearing into the churning waters below. A sense of release washed over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Kneeling on the damp grass, tears mingled with the morning dew. He whispered, "No more." He knew the road ahead was fraught with challenges, wounds to heal, bridges to mend. But standing here, he made a vow. "I'm done running," he said aloud. "It's time to face my demons." He took one last look at the horizon. The sun now fully emerged, casting a golden path across the sea. The future was uncertain, but the possibility of redemption gave him strength. As he rose, a newfound determination steadied him. He would call the rehabilitation center on his way back, enroll in a program, and, most importantly, confront the parts of himself he'd long avoided. Turning away from the edge, he began the walk back, each step filled with purpose. The sharp scent of salt air invigorated him, filling his lungs with the promise of a fresh start. As he left the cliffs behind, the cries of the seagulls echoed his own yearning for release. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, John felt ready to embrace it. The city skyline unfolded before John as the train hurtled toward the station. This time, the towering skyscrapers seemed less oppressive, the weight on his shoulders easing just enough to let him breathe. Yet, beneath the surface, a current of uncertainty rippled, hope intertwined with lingering fear. As the train screeched to a halt, he gathered his belongings, the camera bag now a symbol of purpose rather than burden. Stepping onto the platform, he was enveloped by the city's symphony, the scent of fresh rain on concrete, neon lights flickering like modern constellations against the dusk, and the cacophony of car horns blending into a harmonious buzz. The energy invigorated him, each breath filling his lungs with cautious optimism. His thoughts immediately turned to Sarah. He hovered over her contact on his phone, uncertainty gripping him before he pressed dial. Each ring amplified the silence that had grown between them, unease gnawing at him. The call went to voicemail. "Hi, Sarah. It's me," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "I just got back into town. I'd really like to see you, to talk. I know things haven't been right, but I'm trying to make them better. Please give me a call." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his heart heavy yet hopeful. Determined not to let uncertainty deter him, he decided to head home. Perhaps she would be there, and they could start mending what was broken. The apartment felt emptier than before, echoes of his previous solitude lingering in the air. He noticed that some of Sarah's belongings were missing. Small things like the vase she kept on the windowsill and the cozy blanket from the couch. A flicker of concern stirred within him, but he pushed it aside. Maybe she had taken them to a friend's place for comfort. Over the following week, John immersed himself in a routine aimed at rebuilding his life. Each morning, he attended a support group, sharing his struggles with strangers who understood his pain. Afternoons were spent venturing out into the city, capturing its vibrancy through his lens. The vibrant colors of street murals, the candid smiles of strangers, the interplay of light and shadow, all became subjects through which he rediscovered his passion. The scent of roasting coffee beans mingled with the crisp autumn air as he wandered, the city's heartbeat syncing with his own. Yet, with each unanswered call to Sarah, his anxiety intensified. He rehearsed conversations in his mind, words tumbling over themselves in hopes of finding the right ones to reach her. He couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Small signs he might have missed, fragmented memories of shared glances between Sarah and Alex that now seemed laden with hidden meaning. One afternoon, while reviewing his photos at a cafe, he glanced up and spotted Sarah across the street. His heart leaped. She was walking with hurried steps, a scarf pulled up to shield her face from the brisk wind. He called out to her, but she didn't seem to hear. As he watched, she entered a building, Alex's apartment complex. A sinking feeling washed over him. He recalled the uneasy sensation he'd had at the gallery, moments when he had noticed Sarah laughing at something Alex whispered. A momentary pang of jealousy he had quickly dismissed. Shaking off the thought, he tried to reason with himself. They were friends, after all. It wasn't unusual for her to seek solace in a familiar face. That evening he tried calling her again. This time, she answered. "John," she said, her tone guarded. "Sarah, hi. I've been trying to reach you. I know. I've been busy." "I understand. Look, I was hoping we could meet. There's so much I want to say." A pause lingered on the line. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." A sense of dread settled within him. "Please, Sarah, just an hour. If after that you still don't want to talk, I won't bother you again." She sighed. "I'll think about it. Thank you. I'll wait for your call." As days passed without a response, John's unease grew. Each unanswered call amplified his fears. Determined to find answers, he decided to visit Alex. Perhaps his old friend could shed some light on the situation. The elevator ride up to Alex's apartment felt interminable. John shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation coursing through him. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into the hallway and approached the familiar door, raising his hand to knock. "John!" Alex exclaimed as he opened the door, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "This is a surprise." "Hey, Alex, mind if I come in?" Alex hesitated briefly, his eyes darting down the hallway before stepping aside. "Of course. Come on in." The apartment was impeccably furnished, as always. Artwork adorned the walls, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Yet, an undercurrent of tension permeated the space. John noticed Alex's hesitation, the subtle way he positioned himself between John and the living room. A bead of sweat formed at Alex's temple, betraying his composed demeanor. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" Alex offered, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. "No thanks, I'm good," John replied, his eyes scanning the room. "So, what brings you by?" Alex asked, attempting a casual tone. "I've been trying to reach Sarah," John began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "I thought maybe you'd heard from her." Alex's expression remained neutral. "We've spoken a few times. She's been dealing with a lot." "I know. That's why I want to talk to her. Make things right." Alex nodded slowly, his gaze flickering toward a stack of mail on the table bearing Sarah's name. John's pulse quickened. "Alex, is Sarah staying here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Alex glanced toward the letters, then back at John. She needed a place to stay for a while." "Why didn't you tell me?" John's hands trembled at his sides, nails digging into his palms. "It wasn't my place to say," Alex replied, avoiding eye contact. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. John felt a surge of anger mixed with betrayal. "What's going on between you two?" "Nothing," Alex said quickly, his voice wavering. "We're just friends." "Friends who hide things from me?" "Look, John, maybe you should leave," Alex suggested, his tone firm but his eyes revealing unease. John's gaze landed on a familiar scarf draped over the back of a chair, Sarah's favorite. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "How long?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "How long?" John repeated, his voice rising. "A few months," Alex admitted, guilt casting shadows over his features. "It just happened. We didn't mean for it to. You were my friend. My brother," John said, a mix of rage and profound hurt twisting his words. "How could you do this?" "I never wanted to hurt you," Alex said earnestly, his eyes pleading. "But you pushed her away. She was lonely, and I was there for her." "Don't you dare justify this," John spat. "I know I wasn't perfect, but this?" Alex held up his hands defensively. "I'm sorry, John, truly, but we can't change what's happened." The room seemed to close in around him. John's mind raced with images of Sarah and Alex together, each one more painful than the last. Alex watched him with a mix of guilt and sadness etched on his face. Without another word, John turned and stormed out of the apartment, Alex calling after him. The hallway blurred as he made his way to the elevator, his pulse pounding in his ears. The slam of Alex's door echoed in his mind, morphing into the relentless beat of his own heart as he searched for answers. The evening air was cold as John walked aimlessly through the streets, the revelation replaying in his mind. Betrayal, anger, sadness, All swirled within him, threatening to overwhelm. Amidst the chaos, one destination crystallized in his mind, the park where he and Sarah had once shared picnics and dreams. He found himself outside the small park, the trees standing barren, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, leaves crunched underfoot, the sound accentuating the fragile ground he tread upon. Taking a deep breath, he dialed her number. She answered after the second ring. "John? Sarah, we need to talk, please." A long pause followed. "All right, meet me at the park." He waited on a bench, the memories of happier times haunting the quiet surroundings. The streetlights cast long shadows, their glow revealing the uncertainty that gnawed at him. When Sarah arrived, she looked both weary and resolute. She fidgeted with a loose thread on her coat, her eyes reflecting a storm of regret and confusion. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, his breath visible in the chilly air. She sat beside him, maintaining a cautious distance. "What did you want to say?" "I went to see Alex," he began. "I know about the two of you." She closed her eyes briefly, a single tear escaping. "I wanted to tell you myself." "Why didn't you?" he asked, his voice laden with hurt. "I didn't know how," she admitted, her gaze dropping to her hands clasped in her lap. "Everything is so complicated." "Complicated?" he echoed, a bitter edge to his voice. "You were with my best friend." She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never meant for it to happen. I was lonely, John. You shut me out for so long. I trusted you, both of you," he said, his hands trembling. "I know I wasn't there for you, but I was trying to change." "I tried to reach you," she said softly. "But every time I got close, you pushed me away. The drinking, the silence. It was like living with a stranger." "I've changed," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm trying to be better. I want to fix this." She shook her head sadly. "So much has happened. I don't know if we can go back." "Do you love him?" The question hung heavily between them. Her silence spoke volumes, her eyes avoiding his. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was hurt and confused. Alex was there when you weren't." The honesty in her words cut deep. He felt a mix of rage and profound sadness, tears threatening to blur his vision. "I wish I could undo all the pain I've caused you." "Me too," she said, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "But we can't rewrite the past. We have to live with what we've done." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared history pressing upon them. The trees swayed gently in the wind, leaves whispering secrets of a time long gone. Finally, Sarah stood up. "I think we both need time," she said gently. "Time to heal, to figure out what we really want." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I understand." She offered a faint smile. "Take care of yourself, John." As she walked away, he felt a profound emptiness settle within him. The finality of her departure resonated like a closing door, the echoes fading into the crisp night air. Night enveloped the city as John wandered without direction, the streets a blur of lights and shadows. The flickering neon signs and distant sirens blended into a numbing backdrop. He found himself drawn back to the skyscraper where it all began, the rooftop where he had missed the perfect shot, where his failures had seemed insurmountable. The security guard recognized him from previous visits and, sensing his turmoil, offered a silent nod as John made his way to the elevator. The ascent was eerily silent, the hum of the machinery a distant sound in his awareness. Stepping onto the rooftop, he was greeted by a vast expanse of stars scattered across the velvet sky. The city's heartbeat pulsed below, oblivious to his inner turmoil. The cool air filled his lungs, the wind tugging at his clothes like an old friend seeking attention. He walked to the edge, the abyss before him both terrifying and strangely compelling. The city lights below shimmered like distant stars, cold and unattainable. The void beckoned, a dark canvas awaiting his final decision. John looked out over the city, memories flooding his mind. The joy of his first published photograph, the warmth of Sarah's embrace, the laughter shared with friends now distant. All intertwined with the shadows of his mistakes, the bridges burned, the opportunities squandered. A hollow emptiness expanded within him, not a desire for an end, but a longing for the pain to cease. He yearned for an escape, a release from the relentless ache. Thoughts raced chaotically. Images of laughter, moments of pain, flashes of a future that seemed just out of reach. A voice inside whispered of peace, while another urged him to hold on. In his mind, he saw Sarah's face, heard his mother's gentle encouragement, felt the embrace of his father's acceptance. He remembered the serenity of the ocean, the promise he had made to himself. The distant hum of traffic underscored his wavering resolve, doubts flickering like the city's lights. A faint melody drifted up from the streets, a busker playing a soulful tune. The notes hung in the air, a reminder that beauty still existed, even in the darkest moments. The first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, the rays brushing against his face like a gentle caress. "Is this all that's left?" he whispered to the night. He gazed upward, the stars reflecting in his weary eyes. He felt the edge beneath his feet, the cool metal railing a thin barrier between him and the endless sky. The city's hum seemed to quiet, as if holding its breath. An invisible burden pressed down, each regret a stone added to the crushing load he carried. John closed his eyes, allowing a single tear to escape. The wind whispered around him, carrying fragments of conversations, echoes of laughter, the scent of possibilities lost and those yet unseen. Somewhere below, a siren wailed, a distant reminder of life continuing in all its chaotic rhythm. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. The new day unfolded slowly, a canvas of potential. His fingers tightened around the camera strap slung over his shoulder. Raising the camera to his eye, he hesitated, capturing one final image, the sunrise spilling over the city, shadows retreating before the light. A moment later, the rooftop stood silent, the gentle breeze the only witness to his choice.